Many years ago, long before Busayo's Bladder started keeping records, she made a personal decision she believed was wisdom. Busayo decided that public toilets were not for her, not because she was proud or because she was dramatic. It was simply because she believed they were dangerous places where sickness waited patiently for careless people. Once she saw a public toilet, her mind would immediately start imagining germs holding meetings inside, discussing how to attack the next victim. Busayo was a very clean woman, clean to the point of strategy. She washed her hands like a surgeon preparing for operation. She wiped surfaces before sitting down and inspected cups before drinking water. Her room smelled like disinfectant and order. People admired her neatness and even praised it. Some called her classy, while others called her careful. However, nobody knew that underneath all that cleanliness was a dangerous habit quietly growing legs. Busayo avoided public toilets with commitment. She could be outside for hours and still refuse to use one. She would stand in front of a restroom, read the sign, look inside briefly, and then shake her head slowly like someone disappointed in humanity. If she felt pressed, she would tighten her body and say to herself, "Just wait, small time." Well, that small time often became 2 hours, sometimes 3, and she considered it self-control. Her friends noticed and joked about it. One day during an outing, a friend laughed and said, "Busayo, you will hold urine until it learns your timetable." Busayo laughed too and replied confidently, "My body understands me." Her body heard that statement and kept quiet, but it did not agree. Busayo planned her movements around toilets. Before leaving the house, she would use the toilet twice just to be sure. She drank water in small controlled sips like medicine. She avoided long journeys unless she knew where her destination toilet was. And if there was a delay on the road, she would sit quietly with her knees crossed together, pretending nothing was happening inside her. She believed endurance was strength. Sometimes she would feel a small pain in her lower stomach, but she would ignore it and say it was nothing. She believed that the body adjusted if you trained it well. After all, she had been doing it for years. What could go wrong now? At work, Busayo was known for her discipline. She rarely left her desk. She focused deeply. Even when she felt pressed, she would tell herself she would go later. Well, that later became lunchtime, and lunchtime became closing hours. By the time she finally reached her house and ran to her private toilet, she would feel victorious like someone who had defeated temptation. She would sit there sighing with relief and say proudly, "See, nothing happened." Her friends warned her. One of them said, "Busayo, this thing you are doing is not good though." But Busayo waved her hand dismissively and replied, "You people exaggerate everything. As long as I don't use dirty toilets, I am safe." Another friend added, "Don't you know you can get sick from holding urine too?" Busayo laughed loudly and asked, "Which sickness? Urine sickness?" They all laughed and moved on. Busayo moved on too, holding her bladder tighter. Even at events, she behaved the same way. Weddings, seminars, meetings. She would sit through long programs, shifting slightly in her seat, smiling through discomfort and clapping at jokes while her body begged for mercy. When someone asked if she wanted to excuse herself, she would say, "I'm fine," even when fine was no longer correct. Busayo believed she was winning. She believed her discipline was impressive. She believed she had beaten public toilets and trained her body into obedience. She was still laughing, still confident, still proud of her control, and still convinced that public toilets were the enemy and holding it was the solution. Unknown to her, this habit remained harmless only in her imagination. In real life, it was slowly turning into a sport she kept winning at the cost of her body. The more she succeeded in avoiding public toilets, the more confident she became. That confidence soon turned into pride. Pride turned into routine, and routine turned into risk. Now, the problem with habits is that they grow quietly. Busayo did not just wake up one day and decide to endanger herself. She simply kept saying, just small time, and that small time kept stretching its legs. The day everything started bending was a Saturday. Busayo had attended a long professional seminar across town, the one that started early and refused to end on time. Water was served generously. Busayo drank it carefully at first, then forgot herself during one intense session and finished the entire bottle. Halfway through clapping for a speaker she did not understand, she felt something like pressure. This was not ordinary pressure. This one was direct, clear, and serious. She crossed her legs gently and adjusted her sitting position. No problem. She had handled worse before. When the break was announced, people stood up and rushed towards the toilets. Busayo stood up too, followed them halfway and then stopped. She peeped inside the restroom briefly and her face changed. The floor was wet. The smell was suspicious and the queue was long. She shook her head slowly. No, not today. She returned to her seat with dignity and whispered to herself, I will pee at home, it's not far. However, 30 minutes later, her bladder disagreed. Busayo started sweating lightly. She laughed at jokes she did not find funny. She tapped her foot. She leaned forward slightly, then leaned back. Her stomach tightened. She told herself she was fine. She had held it before. She could hold it again. A colleague leaned over and asked, Busayo, are you okay? Yes, she quickly replied. I am just tired. Well, that was a lie. The seminar dragged on. Speaker followed speaker, and Busayo's confidence started peeling. She stopped clapping, stopped laughing, and focused on just breathing. She told herself stories. Just endure. Just small time. Just reach the house. Unfortunately, by the time the seminar ended, standing up felt like betrayal. Her legs shook slightly as she walked. She ignored it. Outside, the sun was hot and traffic was heavy. Kai, everything that could delay her decided to cooperate at that time. Inside the car, the pressure increased. Busayo shifted in her seat and pressed her thighs together tightly. She opened the window for air, as if that would help. She clenched her jaw and stopped talking completely. The driver asked casually, Madam, should I stop somewhere? Busayo shook her head immediately. No, she said. Just go. Go where? That was the question. By the time they reached her street, Busayo was no longer confident. She was frightened. The pressure had turned painful, sharp and stubborn. She walked quickly towards the door with the keys shaking in her hand. She fumbled once and twice, then finally opened the door and rushed inside. Relief was close. Or so she thought. She ran to the toilet and froze. Nothing happened. She sat there waiting, encouraging herself, whispering, begging and bargaining. But her bladder refused to cooperate. The pressure remained, but release did not come. Pain replaced relief. Her heart began to beat fast. Busayo stood up slowly. This had never happened before. She tried again, but nothing. She felt dizzy. She held her stomach and went to sit on the bed, breathing heavily. For the first time since she started avoiding public toilets, Busayo panicked. The body she thought she controlled had stopped listening. She reached for her phone with shaking hands. This was no longer a joke. The pressure in her lower stomach had changed character. It was no longer a simple urge. It had turned into something heavier, tighter and more stubborn. Panic grabbed her. She stood up again and went back to the toilet, hoping that her body had forgiven her small rebellion, but it had not. She sat down carefully, closed her eyes and waited. Still, nothing happened. The pressure remained mocking her. Sweat formed on her forehead. Her heartbeat was faster now, not from fear alone, but also from confusion. This was new. This had never happened before. Holding it had always ended in victory before. She stood up abruptly and felt dizzy again. The room tilted slightly, then corrected itself. Okay, she whispered, trying to sound calm. Relax. But relax did not come. Busayo walked around the room slowly, holding her lower stomach, breathing in and out the way she had seen people do during labor scenes in films. She laughed weakly at the thoughts, then stopped laughing when the pain sharpened. It felt like her body had locked something from the inside and thrown the key away. She tried drinking water, thinking maybe that would help, but the water entered and sat there like it was waiting for instructions that never came. The pressure increased. Her legs began to shake slightly. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes again. This was no longer endurance. This was punishment. Busayo remembered all the times she had laughed at warnings, all the jokes, all the confidence, all the moments she had said her body understood her. Well, her body was speaking now, and it was not using polite language. She picked up her phone and called her friend Sulia. Sulia, something is wrong. What happened? Sulia asked, already alarmed. I can't urinate, Busayo said, lowering her voice as if the problem would hear her. I have been trying. There was a pause on the line, then Sulia asked, for how long? Since I got home. Busayo, Sulia said, how long did you hold it for? Busayo hesitated and then replied, several hours. Several hours, like how many? Busayo closed her eyes. I don't know. Sulia did not shout because that would make it worse. You need to go to the hospital, she said calmly. Busayo shook her head immediately, even though Sulia could not see her. Let me wait small, she replied. Maybe it will pass. Busayo, Sulia said firmly. This thing does not pass by waiting. Busayo hung up without replying. She did not want hospital talk yet. Hospitals asked questions and they examined things. Unfortunately, hospitals might not understand her choices. She tried again. She sat on the toilet, leaned forward, leaned back, breathed deeply, whispered encouragement to her body as if it was a stubborn child. But nothing happened. Rather, the pain intensified suddenly. It became more sharp and frightening. She cried out in a sound that surprised her. That was when fear settled properly in her head. Busayo quickly dressed, ignoring the discomfort, and stepped outside to get air. The evening breeze touched her face, but it did nothing for her stomach. Neighbors greeted her casually, and she forced a smile that did not belong to her. Good evening, someone said. Good evening, Busayo replied tightly. She could not stand straight anymore. She returned inside and sat heavily on the sofa, breathing fast. Her hands shook. Tears gathered in her eyes without permission. This was no longer about public toilets. This was about something being wrong inside her body. She called Sulia again. Come, she simply said. Please come. By the time Sulia arrived, Busayo was caught slightly with one hand pressing firmly against her lower stomach. Sulia took one look at her and swung to action. We are going now, she said. Busayo tried to argue. Let me try again, but Sulia cut her off. You have tried enough. On the way to the hospital, Busayo kept quiet as the pain traveled with her, constant and relentless. She watched the street lights blow past and wondered how a habit she thought was control had brought her here. As they entered the emergency unit, a nurse looked at Busayo once and asked, "What is wrong?" Busayo swallowed hard. "I can't urinate." The nurse frowned and asked, "How long?" Busayo opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. For the first time in her life, she had no answer that sounded safe. The hospital did not waste time on Busayo's pride. She was wheeled into the emergency unit and her body became the main speaker. Nurses moved around her calmly, still asking questions that required honest answers. Busayo tried to answer with dignity, but dignity was leaking fast. "How long have you not urinated?" the nurse asked again. Busayo opened her mouth, then closed it again. Since today, she finally said. The nurse raised her eyebrows slightly, the kind of look that meant she had heard better lies. "How many hours?" Busayo swallowed. Several hours. The nurse nodded and wrote something down. But you know now, writing in hospitals never means good news. Sulia stood close with her eyes fixed on Busayo with a mixture of concern and silent judgment. Several hours is not measurement. You've been doing this thing for years. Busayo looked away. This one is different, she muttered. Yes, Sulia replied. Different has finally noticed you. A doctor arrived shortly after. He looked calm and unhurried, like someone who had seen worse things before breakfast. He listened carefully as the nurse explained. Then he turned to Busayo and said, "You are retaining urine. Your bladder is overdistended." Busayo nodded as if she understood, even though the words sounded like another language. "We need to relieve it immediately," the doctor continued. "We will insert a catheter." The word landed like a slap. Busayo's eyes widened. "Catheter?" she repeated faintly. "Yes," the doctor said. "A tube to drain the urine." Busayo shook her head quickly. "No, please, I can try again. It will come out." The doctor did not argue. He only looked at her and said, "It will not." Busayo's heart did a backflip. This was her worst fear, wearing a white coat. Public toilets had always been her enemy because she feared contamination, exposure, and embarrassment. Now, the hospital wanted to introduce a tube into the exact place she had been protecting with stubbornness. "I don't want it," she said weakly. Sulia leaned closer and whispered, "Busayo, this is not the time to be forming control, oh." Busayo looked at her with watery eyes and said, "I can't. I don't like things like this." The nurse smiled sympathetically. "Nobody likes it, but everybody who needs it does it." Well, that sentence had no comforts. They prepared her anyway. The curtains were drawn, gloves were worn, and instruments appeared neatly arranged, clean, professional, and unavoidable. Busayo lay there sweating, gripping the bed sheets, and breathing like someone about to give birth to shame. "Relax," the nurse said gently. "This will help you." Oh wow, help had never sounded so threatening before. When the catheter was finally inserted, Busayo gasped, then froze. The sensation was strange, uncomfortable, and deeply humbling. Then something happened that shocked her completely. She felt relief, warm, undeniable relief. Urine drained immediately, more than Busayo thought her body even contained. The bag filled up steadily and the pressure vanished almost instantly. Busayo let out a sound that was half sigh, half cry. "Oh," she whispered. Sulia stared at the bag and shook her head. "Busayo, you were carrying a reservoir." Busayo wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry, but she wanted to also disappear. Instead, she lay there staring at the ceiling, humbled beyond words. The doctor returned and examined the output. "You waited for too long," he said. "This could have damaged your kidneys." Busayo closed her eyes. Her fear had finally caught up with her. The thing she ran for had met her sitting down with witnesses, gloves, and medical forms. She had avoided public toilets for years, but now here she was, lying in a hospital bed with a tube, doing the job she refused to let her body do on its own. And the irony was too loud to ignore. Busayo stayed in the hospital longer than she expected. What she thought would be a quick emergency visit turned into observation, fluids, tests, and instructions that seemed more like threats. The catheter remained in place, taped carefully but visible enough to remind her every time she shifted on the bed that some habits do not live without embarrassment. The first night there was the hardest, not because of pain, but because of thinking. Busayo lay awake, listening to the hospital sounds, machine beeping, nurses walking past, and other patients coughing. She wondered how she had convinced herself for so long that control meant strength. The bag beside her got filled up steadily, doing the work her body had refused to do earlier. Each drop felt like an accusation. Sulia visited early the next morning with fruits and a face that mixed relief with a silent "I told you so. She sat down and looked at the catheter before looking at Busayo. So, madam, how far? Busayo exhaled slowly. I have learned. Sulia smiled faintly. At what cost now? Busayo did not answer. She did not need to. The tube already answered for her. The doctor came later to explain things properly. He spoke calmly, not to scare her, but to correct her. Holding urine repeatedly, he explained, weakened her bladder muscles and confused her body signals. The infection that had been forming quietly finally found an opportunity to express itself. What happened was not sudden. It was cumulative. Busayo listened without interruption. This time, she did not argue. When the catheter was finally removed, it was not a celebration. It was careful, slow, and guided. Busayo felt exposed but also wiser. She was instructed to drink water freely, not strategically. She was told to urinate when her body asked for it, not when it was convenient for her. These were simple instructions she should have followed years ago. Before being discharged, a nurse looked at her kindly and said, "Public toilets are not the enemy. Ignoring your body is." Now, that sentence followed Busayo home. At home, her recovery continued quietly. Busayo moved differently now. She drank water without fear and used toilets without negotiation. The first time she used a public restroom after the incident, she stood still for a moment, breathed deeply, and then entered. It was not perfect or clean, but it was necessary. She laughed at herself afterward. When her friends joked later about her old habits, Busayo laughed with them, but this time with humility. "I nearly damaged myself. Cleanliness without sense is danger," she said. Life returned to normal, but something had changed permanently. Busayo no longer bragged about endurance. She now listened, paid attention, and respected her body signals. "Hi, besties. Oya, let's talk. Are you guilty of holding urine?" No need to be shy. I am also guilty, but Busayo's story cannot be in vain. Put your hand on your chest and repeat after me. I will change. I will not hold urine again. Kindly share the story out with your loved ones and give the story a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel if you've not done so by now. Until I bring another story your way. Bye.